Good morning and welcome to the Point. We are pleased to have back on the program the man who seems poised to be the Democratic nominee for governor, Mark Schauer. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Rick.
I say poised because I always wonder about primaries and these kind of things, but it appears to me that both the Democrats and Republicans in this particular cycle are going to get by without any major primaries. That's good news for a guy like you, because that means one less round of fundraising, right?
Well, I started my campaign last May. It was May 28th, and certainly there was no guarantee that I wouldn't have a primary, but rank and file Democrats, other elected leaders, members of our congressional delegation came to me and said, Mark, you're our guy. We want you to be our candidate, and we've been able to make that happen, obviously, through strong fundraising, strong organizing. I've been traveling around the state, building a winning campaign and a winning message, and there comes a point where you actually have to turn in 15,000 valid signatures on nominating petitions, and we're getting ready to do that and look forward to being the Democratic nominee. And the good news is we've been able to focus on the current occupant of that office and the differences between us. And
we'll be able to talk about that in a minute, but you struck on something interesting that I don't think people understand. People are just now, and I shouldn't even say that, there are a lot of people that aren't focused on this campaign yet, and they won't be until August or September.
Right.
Now the filing deadline comes up in April, and so folks who are really engaged know that. Right. But you've already been doing this for a year. I mean, you've already been going out there and doing this for almost a solid 12 months, and you've still got 240 odd days until the general election. Right, who counts? But this is really a commitment. You're somebody who has served, as I pointed out when you were here before, in the State House, in the State Senate, as a U.S. Congressman. So you went into this with your eyes wide open.
And my wife did too.
Right.
Which makes it harder in a sense. You know what the campaign actually entails.
When you sat down to have that conversation, you say, look, we've already run for all of these things. We've been victorious. Sometimes we haven't been victorious. We're going to run this race. You know what the commitment is. And once you do that, there's no turning back. So now, a year into this, give me your take on where this campaign is.
Well, I'm glad I decided to run for governor, and I know in my wife's heart of hearts, she is too. We love Michigan. We care very deeply about our state. We're parents, we're grandparents, and when we see the wrong priorities of our current governor and what 4 more years of a Rick Snyder administration would mean to our state, really running for governor is the right thing to do. I'm the son and grandson of public school teachers. I used to run Head Start. I mean, public education is our top priority. I met with a group of East Grand Rapids parents the other night, and to hear their stories about what's happening to their kids in their classrooms, more crowded classrooms, fewer teachers, basic education programs gone, that's the wrong direction for our state. And instead of, our current governor's top priority of a big corporate tax cut, that's not working, and raising taxes on retirees and working families like our daughters and low-wage earners, we need to change our priorities. We need to invest in people. We need to invest in our communities. That's the way we build a high-wage, high-skill economy and a strong middle class. That's my passion for Michigan.
Well, let's start with the very first thing that we have all talked about. I talked to you about it when you were in the legislature with Governor Granholm when she was in office. Jobs. We've got a jobs report out this week that shows Michigan with a 7.8% unemployment rate, which most people would still consider pretty high, but it is also the best it's been since 2008.
Still point above the nation's unemployment rate.
About 1.2% higher.
Still almost 400,000 Michiganders without work. The previous 3 months that have been reported on, 12,000 people had lost their jobs. I mean, look, what's happening, we shouldn't be surprised by Rick Snyder. He's a corporate venture capitalist, a lot like Mitt Romney. Their number one priority is a corporate tax break that's paid for by shifting tax increases on the backs of retirees and the middle class and low-wage earners and cutting education. And it's not working. We have the highest proportion of children living in poverty in the Great Lakes state. Our middle class is shrinking. According to Rick Snyder's own Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the fastest growing job segment in Michigan are fast food jobs. The projection from a series of economists that looked at projected job growth in each of the 50 states, Michigan would be 49th out of 50 over the next 10 years. So we've got to shift our priorities, and education, is the silver bullet to building that talented workforce that's going to create jobs and attract jobs to Michigan. Well, and we'll talk more about this, but rebuilding our infrastructure is a key way to create tens of thousands of jobs and drive our economy.
Well, the first thing I have written down is jobs, and that's what we're talking about. So you say both infrastructure, and the second thing, by the way, is roads, so that plays right into that. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right.
We know that this governor has talked about spending more money. The legislature has not gone along with it, although they are funneling bits and pieces of money in there. What is your plan then that would tie into both of those? A, creating jobs by fixing roads, and how do you pay for it?
Well, I think we have to give you a little bit of history. I won my state house seat in 1996, beat a Republican incumbent in a really tough district, had a bullseye on my back from day one, and John Engler, Republican governor at the time, proposed raising the revenues to fix our roads. I went home, talked to my constituents, talked to Governor Engler, talked to others, other stakeholders, and I supported that at that time. It helped
build Michigan 2, right?
Yes, it was 1998. Helped make that happen. When I was in Congress, I made sure we had additional money to help us fix potholes and fix our roads. This governor has made it a top priority, and he has a legislature of his own party. Super majority in the Senate, a healthy majority in the House. He's gotten nowhere, and so. That's a demonstration of an ineffective leader in the governor's office, but also he hasn't gotten it done because he's already raised taxes on the people he's asking to raise taxes on again. He's proposed a gas tax increase, a vehicle registration fee increase. We know who'd pay for that. That'd be the middle class. He's already raised their taxes. So we need to press the restart button on this. I, as a member of the legislature for 12 years, know how the legislature works. I'm going to represent, every one of the 83 counties that Republican and Democratic legislators represent. We're going to present a fair plan that provides for a real fair shared sacrifice to fix our roads.
What does that look like?
Well, I think it's what I tell you. It's not asking the same middle class taxpayers, the same retirees, the same low wage earners, individuals who've seen their taxes raised to provide a corporate tax cut to pay again. I'm not saying they won't be part of this solution, but the business community that uses our roads and drives our roads needs to be part of that equation as well. So there's going to be a balanced plan. It will be a bipartisan plan. By nature, it should be, and it has to be. But I am very confident that with my ability to work with legislators, roll up my sleeves, engage in some give and take, which has to happen, we'll get it done. Because this is probably for most people, front in mind, their number one issue. I mean, I do the pothole slalom when I'm driving down the road.
You just did it out in front of the station.
College Street is very bad, as you know. But look, it's costing families money on tire repairs and rims and ball joints. Hurts the competitiveness of our communities and our state. It's dangerous, and it is probably the best job creator that I can think of, Rick. So for all of these reasons, I know we can put together a coalition to get it done. And like other issues this governor has struggled with the legislature, when he's engaged in the legislative process, he's really lost ground. So it's one of the reasons we need a new governor, so we can put people to work and make Michigan more competitive.
Let me ask you about that very thing, because if you are elected governor, that will have a big impact. Being at the top of the ticket, that's likely to have a big impact on elections as you go on down. Not beyond the possibility that if that happens, Democrats could pick up seats in the House, perhaps even enough for a majority. As an observer, I think it's highly unlikely that you pick up enough seats in the Senate to get a Democratic majority over there. I'm not saying it's impossible. I don't second guess the electorate, but just looking at sheer numbers and how those districts are drawn. So then how would you, as a Democratic governor, go to that Republican, presumably Republican-controlled Senate and make a deal?
Well, again, the roads, I'll guarantee you the roads in their districts are deplorable too. And, their constituents are burning up the phone lines to their offices and probably to their homes. That's what happens when you're a member of the legislature. People call you at home. So it is a priority, and I think it is a question of how we do this. I mean, look, there are Tea Party Republicans that would probably not vote to raise any revenue source to fix roads. you know, but there's common ground to be found on this issue, and I feel very confident that we're going to win back the State House. I'm meeting with great candidates all over the state. I think, you know, the Republicans control every lever of power in state government, the House, the Senate, the governor's office, the Supreme Court, so people know who to hold, which party to hold accountable for a struggling economy and education cuts, retirement tax, and so forth. So I believe we're going to make gains, but as I said earlier, this is a prime opportunity for bipartisanship and bipartisanship problem solving. That's been my history and my style in my time in public service.
Do you think that the $1 billion over 10 years, is that about the right amount, or have you peeled it back?
I'll be honest with you, I have not had my own forecast conducted. I mean, that sounds about right. And what the legislature is doing now is taking a bit here, a bit there out of a so-called surplus that was, you know, created on the backs of education cuts and retiree and individual tax increases. That's not a long-term fix. I mean, Michigan is 50 out of 50 in the nation in spending on our roads. 50 out of 50. This governor has had 3.5 years to do it and has gotten absolutely nothing done. So I believe it will be just another great opportunity for us to, you know, value our communities, make our state more competitive, put a lot of people to work. And it's not just construction workers, it's engineers, it's people who supply materials and so forth.
I make a prediction. The word education will be the one most used word in this election cycle, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Our guest this morning is the Democratic candidate for governor of the state of Michigan, Mark Schauer, and we were talking about the issue, and just in the break we were talking about, it's the issue that everybody talks about, particularly this time of year. Roads, road construction, and the very real notion that Michigan roads need some attention.
Right.
But from your perspective, I know, having talked to you and many people in the state, education remains one of the real flashpoints.
Yes.
Now, the argument about education funding that goes on almost eternally, and will certainly go on during this campaign, because the sitting governor has a much different view of education funding and the way it really looks than you do. But nobody disagrees that education is a key to jobs. Jobs the key to a good economy. So, as governor, what would you do to ensure that my kids, your grandkids, all of the folks out there have children that are getting an appropriate and at least adequate, if not better, education?
Well, Rick, I want to be clear that public education is my #1 priority. It's not the top priority of our current governor. His top priority was a $1.8 billion corporate tax break in trickle-down economics that's not trickling down jobs. The key to a good job is a good education, and I fundamentally believe that every child in every zip code deserves a quality education. That's what our Constitution guarantees, and when I swear to uphold our Constitution, I'm going to mean it. And investing in public education, making sure we're engaging in best practice so every school is a quality school is my #1 priority. Now, I know the governor has a very different argument about what he considers investments in education. You know, he claimed in his State of the State address additional $662 additional dollars per pupil. I mean, he lives in a very different reality. All you have to do is talk to teachers, parents, school board members. They will tell you what's going on in their classroom. I mean, the cut in per pupil funding in the classroom is about $500 per pupil under Governor Rick Snyder. The result is kids in more crowded classrooms, basic educational services and programs, whether it's art or libraries or foreign language, are gone. I met with a group of East Grand Rapids parents earlier this week, and they're holding fundraisers to raise money to pay for these basic educational programs because of their commitment to their kids, and I salute them for that. But you know, we have to make education our top priority and actually mean it and follow through. So funding is a part of that, but also the policies of this governor and his legislature have systematically been privatizing and undermining public education in Michigan. 80% of charter schools in Michigan are run by for-profit companies. They've got to satisfy their shareholders and pay their advertisement executives and their real estate deals and so forth. Those dollars should be going into our classroom. This legislature created these so-called cyber schools, which sit kids in front of computer terminals with headsets instead of classrooms with highly trained teachers. I think that's wrong. Again, that's money going to for-profit companies that ought to go to our classrooms. This Education Achievement Authority that was, to take over failing schools has really been a failed experiment and another drain on dollars to our public schools. So we need to commit to all of our neighborhood schools. There's a moral obligation, in my opinion, to make sure every child has a great neighborhood school, has great teachers, and I will expect and demand quality and accountability from all of our schools to make sure every child is learning.
How much more money do you want to put in the classroom? I mean, what is there a dollar figure? I know there isn't a silver bullet or a magic formula, but do you have in mind how much more money you would like to see?
We have to at least get back to where we started 3.5 years ago, and there's a great website we were talking about during the break called Kids Not CEOs that people can go to and actually see the cut. So we need to put those dollars back into our public schools, and then I think part of what we have to do is look at what does it really cost to educate kids and kids of all abilities. But what I will tell you for certain is that our schools are dealing with fewer resources. They're under more stress. 50 school districts last year were in deficit, and I predict that number will be growing. So I think we're going to have to take a real hard look at Proposal A that was passed by the voters in 20 years ago now, and really reevaluate that commitment to public education.
So it's not just funding, but it's also perhaps the way schools are funded.
Absolutely. I start from the premise, and my dad was a high school biology and chemistry teacher. My grandmother was a first grade teacher. And I saw how hard they worked, and our teachers work very hard. They need support. They need training and retraining, access to best practice, master teachers, supportive school boards and intermediate school districts, I think will continue to play a more and more important role. But Rick, the other thing that we have to acknowledge is that we have the highest proportion of children living in poverty in Michigan of any state in the Great Lakes region, and we have kids going to school with special needs, and we need to address those socioeconomic factors. I mean, candidly, we need to be that village to help educate our children. And I say that because the key to a strong middle class and a strong economy is an educated workforce, and so every child needs to graduate from high school with the skills and tools they need, whether it's to go on to a 4-year degree or community college or a skilled trades program. I mean, that's the foundation for a strong economy. And I'll close with this: the states that are beating us economically with lower unemployment rates, faster job growth rates, higher median incomes are those that have made education their top priority and put the resources and supports behind it.
Where does Common Core figure into that? That's been a big conversation. We know that set of standards that has been adopted by, I think, 45 states around the country. Is that a good way for Michigan to advance its education possibilities?
High standards always matter, and that's what Common Core is about. And as we watch other states get further and further into implementing this Common Core curriculum, I think there are some lessons to be learned. Again, there's this syndrome of teachers feeling like they're trapped teaching to a test. I mean, that's not education at our best. So I think we have to learn some of those lessons. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, we need to provide high standards and sort of the curriculum frameworks for our educators. Then we need to support them in the classroom and respect them as professionals so that they are able to address the unique needs and talents of all of their children.
One comparison that often comes up is the amount of money that states spend on schools versus what they spend on corrections. And the case can very often be made that the money you don't spend in the upfront can be equated to the money you spend later in corrections. Talk to us about the state of our corrections department.
Well, it's very interesting. Some states use the percentage of kids reading at grade level in 3rd grade as a predictor of their prison population. So this is a primary reason why education matters and should be our top priority. But Michigan still spends more in corrections than higher education. So I worked my entire career to help sort of both on the front end and the back end. You know, I used to run Head Start, and part of the Head Start research was that you know, there's a 7 to 1 dollar return on investment, and part of that return is fewer young juveniles getting involved in the criminal justice system. But things like drug treatment courts, mental health courts, veterans courts, these alternatives to making sure folks get the treatment they need, rather than sort of this revolving door in prison, in jail and prison. Part of it is looking at the Prisoner Reentry Initiative, which is a way to make sure, you know, 80% of inmates are going to be coming back to their home community. Don't you think it makes sense for them to have the tools they need and the supports to be successful in that community? And I think, you know, we have to look at our sentencing guidelines. I mean, right now there's you know, this administration has been very lukewarm on this Supreme Court decision dealing with juvenile life offenders. And, you know, I think it makes sense to allow at least a sentencing judge to evaluate and resentence, since the courts have determined that that's cruel and unusual punishment to sentence a juvenile for life in prison without any opportunity of parole. So that goes to the broad question of evaluating our sentencing guidelines too.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to open a huge can of worms. And when you talk about the tax structure in the state, we've already talked a little bit about school funding, and you're clear that we need to take a look and at least evaluate how we're doing that. But you've also mentioned a couple of times, and in previous shows, about a shift in the business tax, went from the Michigan business tax to a structure that has benefited some businesses that you say has not trickled down, using your words. Would that be a top priority?
Those are the Pope's words too.
Right. Would that be a top priority for you to start looking at, if not reversing, at least changing that structure?
I think we have to look at Michigan's tax code in general. We have a flat income tax, which by nature is regressive, meaning people who earn less pay a higher proportion of their incomes on taxes than people with higher incomes. So I think there are some fairness arguments. I think we have to look at a number of tax loopholes and tax expenditures and special tax treatments, including within the governor's Michigan Economic Development Corporation, that aren't creating jobs. And you know, as part of that, of course, corporate taxation has to be examined. I mean, what this governor did is not just changed our corporate tax structure to a corporate income tax, but provided a $1.8 billion tax break to businesses in Michigan, and that was a choice, that was a priority. I think a wiser choice for Michigan is to support public education, support higher education, support our communities, which are, you know, with the right sort of quality of life in those communities, are magnets for jobs. So it fundamentally is a question of priorities, Rick.
Democratic candidate for Governor Mark Schauer, as always, we appreciate you being here. You will be back between now and November, I certainly hope, and we'll be back with more To The Point in just a moment. Our thanks to Mark Schauer for being our guest this morning. It's going to be a very interesting election cycle, and next week we're going to talk about that with the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party. Bobby Shostak will have a very different take on Decision 2014 than the one you heard this morning, and the following week, the chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party. It's election time already. Hope you'll join us next Sunday morning. To The Point.